I like looking at the influencers' properties and seeing them renovate them.
Recently, actually, I've started getting on like $1 million listings on TikTok, and I find that really interesting. I suppose there's a bit of voyeurism in there about what you can get for your money.
Who doesn't love a sneak peek into the lives of Australia's rich and famous, especially when it comes to their property moves? And today we're going to give you exactly that. Welcome to Real Talk, realestate.com.au's property news podcast. In this episode, we're covering which of the country's A-listers have made the biggest and boldest moves in 2023. We'll also discuss where they're buying, how they're buying, and who is helping them do it. We spoke with a few people about their thoughts on celebrity purchases.
Yeah, I love seeing where people live.
I feel like we're not really exposed to it in Melbourne. Seeing houses in like LA and New York is pretty crazy.
Get a good look behind the scenes, see if they actually live like that, look out for piles of laundry on the floor.
Maybe the Kardashians. They live in a gated community and I just feel like their house would be insane.
Joining me to unpack it all is Tracey Dixon, Director and Partner of McGrath Hunters Hill, one of Sydney's most prestigious addresses, and Stephen Nicholls, Newscorp's Prestige Property Editor, who has the inside track on all the big sales in Sydney. Thanks so much for joining me today, guys. I do have a little bit of a confession because I could actually scroll luxury property for hours. I know I'm not the only person who shares in this guilty pleasure. 2023 has seen some pretty crazy sales. Stephen, what was the ultra premium end of the market like this year?
Even at the general end of the market, we saw steady increases over the year. But the top end has been extraordinary. It's actually been crazy. We saw some sellers attain incredible prices and make huge profits on properties that they'd only bought even, 12 months ago. One example of that was the waterfront home known as Acuna on the Point Piper waterfront. That was owned by Scott Barlow and his socialite wife, Alina. They bought it for $45 million 12 months ago. Then they sold it for $60 million. That was an extraordinary price, $15 million profit in 12 months. It's not an isolated case. We had down on the Double Bay waterfront, the art dealer Steve Nicholls, who'd bought an amalgamated unit on the Double Bay waterfront, which he'd bought for $7.9 million last year. He did a marble makeover. He sold it for $14 million. What buyers have particularly liked this year are the beautiful renovated designer properties. So this one was completely done over and would tap into that downsizer market that wants something right on the harbour front. In this case, it was actually bought by someone who was from one of New Zealand's most wealthy families. That's the other thing that we've seen, investment from overseas. And people who are upgrading have done so well from their properties.
Wow, that is a lofty investment. But apart from the two properties that you just mentioned, is there any one sale in 2023 that really did stand out for you as a wow moment?
Look, it's the little shacks in great locations that fetch amazing prices, which really do it for me. There was one case down in Tamarama. It was a little modest bungalow called Langsyne. That sold for $45 million back in May, which was an oceanfront record. It was an 1,100 square metre block, so a big block. That was bought by the advertising guru David Droga. He doesn't even live here. He lives in New York, but he's planning to use this as his holiday home. He's an Australian guy who went to boarding school. He's actually from the Snowy Mountains area. When he first moved to Sydney after boarding school, he actually stayed in Tamarama and used to sleep on someone's couch. And he'd actually seen this property many, many years ago and thought it was the best block of land in Sydney and he had to have it.
There's an emotional connection there for that buyer. Like $45 million is just outrageous. Tracey, you specialise in some of Sydney's most prestigious property, Hunters Hill, kind of North Shore area. How exclusive is the area? Can you describe what type of property you would find in that region?
People often come to the North Shore for perhaps those bigger blocks of land, some of the heritage properties that have been beautifully presented, things like large garaging, tennis courts, or perhaps jetties and waterfront homes. So I specifically have an office in Lane Cove where we service Longueville, Northwood, Greenwich, those areas, as well as Hunters Hill, Woolwich. Woolwich is one of the highest median house price suburbs in Sydney, like $7.5 million. It's only a small suburb. It's a little bit more secretive, perhaps. perhaps than living in some of the probably eastern suburbs areas where there's a lot more well-known people. And I guess they're looking for the bigger block of land, privacy. So I find people buy up from surrounding suburbs to our locations particularly on the waterfront. And they're looking for a destination where they can sort of live and raise children quite regularly as well. I find that from primary school up to high school, it's a destination for most of those families.
You mentioned a price tag of $7 million for a median sale. What other types of price tags are those areas getting?
It was only a few years ago, probably prior to COVID, that Hunters Hill's highest price was about $23 million. We're sort of pushing into that $20 to $30 million region. Longueville has a property for sale at the moment around $50. I think it's attracting a lot of international buyers as well because Mossman, Hunters Hill, Longueville, we have a similar buyer group. So people are looking for that bigger block, a bit more privacy, wide open spaces, tree-lined streets, that kind of thing.
Wow, so that's some pretty exy areas in terms of dollars. Has there been any notable sales this year, if you're even allowed to tell us that?
There's been a couple of homes in Longueville that have sold for over $20 million. So the suburb has achieved a couple of great results for people that had been established owners in those areas for many years. So people downsizing to other suburbs. I had a beautiful Woolwich property that sold for over $20 million. We often get surrounding suburbs buyers coming from Birchgrove or Dural even that are coming closer to water. But this time the buyer was from Millers Point in the city. They hadn't been looking in our area. But often people are attracted by the home. So this home was a waterfront, fully renovated with a big berth for a 60-foot boat, harbour bridge and city views. So really, in terms of, I guess, comparison to some of the $60 million properties in the east, it represents excellent value.
Stephen, you have made a career out of writing about luxury property and the moves of Australia's elite. Why do you think the Aussies are so genuinely obsessed with high-end property and celebrity property moves?
It's obviously voyeurism and escapism and just a matter of seeing how the other half lives. We've got a listing at the moment, Francesca Packer-Barham's apartment in the Horizon Tower. She's listed that for $32 million. She had bought it for $15.8 million only 4 years ago, and that's on level 40 of the Horizon Tower. It's the biggest whole floor apartment in Horizon. When we looked at how we were going to cover the story, we went with inside Francesca Packer-Barham's apartment, the Packer heiress. Everyone's interested in what's on her wall. We can see what it tastes like. People want to know inside the properties of our famous people, and maybe they're looking for design ideas. That apartment is 565 square metres of internal living space. It's got obviously incredible views, 4 balconies and an 8-car garage.
I guess when a celebrity lists their property or, somebody of status, it's almost like an intimate look into their everyday life. At realestate.com.au, we have an entire site section that is dedicated to celebrity property. So people can go on our site and have their eyeballs filled with different celebrity property moves, whether it's a Packer or a Hemsworth or a Zac Efron or a Margot Robbie or whoever it might be. So, Stephen, what type of celebrity articles get the most traction with the public? Is it sports stars, TV personalities, pollies, actors? Who piques our interest the most?
It's all of the above. And in Sydney, it's especially NRL players. The NRL legend Sam Burgess settled on his Little Bay investment property. He got $1.2 million for it. Nathan Cleary buying a new home from his dad and coach Ivan for $1.7 million. That was big news in June. People just have this huge appetite for NRL players. Latrell Mitchell listing his farm near Taree for $1.38 million in March. They got plenty of eyes. You've also got the social influencers. The billionaire chicken heiress Jess Ingham listing her Woolloomooloo apartment for $15 million in November. That one went absolutely nuts. It's a similar story with Roxy Jacenko, the PR queen. When she sold her Vaucluse mansion for $16 million, it was huge news, $2 million more than what the price guide was. And of course, there's the radio stars. In January, I broke the news of Jackie O selling her place in Wallara for $13 million. That was $2 million more than what she bought it for in 2020. That story also went crazy. Beautiful people and their beautiful homes. It's the perfect mix, and they're the sorts of stories that do really well.
In 2023, which celebrities were making the biggest property moves in the market?
The celebrities making the biggest waves this year were actually the tech celebrities. It was one of the founders of the tech firm of Atlassian, Scott Farquhar, who paid the highest price ever for a house in Australia, $130 million. Look, it was just before Christmas last year, but I thought I'd mention it because we were still talking about it in January. This is in addition to the $71 million that he paid for the double bay mansion Elaine, which is on the waterfront. That was back in 2017, and that broke the house price record then. And then, of course, you've got the co-founder of Atlassian, Mike Cannon-Brookes, who broke the record in 2018 with his $100 million purchase of Fairwater, which is right next door to Elaine on the waterfront. These guys are going to continue to make waves in the property market for sure.
Was there any power couples who were really building themselves an epic portfolio this year?
Yes, there is one standout. You're probably familiar with White Fox. Daniel Contos and Georgia Moore are the couple behind that brand. They're just aged 32 and 33, and they've got a property portfolio now worth more than $120 million. They've only just recently bought yet another home in Vaucluse for $25 million. Three of the properties that they've bought, $34.5 million for a house with harbour views in Fisher Avenue, $38 million for the house next door, and then $25 million for a property backing onto that. That property's in Vaucluse Road, but just backs onto one of these properties. So they're planning a big, massive compound. Then they've also got this other property that they bought back in May. It's just extraordinary what this young couple have managed to achieve. And it just goes to show, bikinis and hoodies. Who would have thought?
That is a lot of real estate, a lot of money. Tracey, are there any noteworthy moves from the rich and famous in your neck of the woods?
Obviously, as an agent working in the suburbs, it's difficult for me to talk about specifics, but I'd have to say a lot of the local areas like Longueville, Hunters Hill, Pymble, they're kind of fueled by locals moving within the area as well as buying up other land holdings within the area. So we have a couple of families that have sort of expanded their holdings within the area this year. Same things happened in Longueville, where one family owned 6 houses in the same street. So what we're finding is people are building their own dynasty in these suburbs. We do also have a lot of overseas buyers coming into the picture. So this is a big trend, and I think that will sort of continue in the next probably 5 to 10 years. You know, it's been a proven real estate market in Sydney particularly, but I think there's a small group of people doing all the business. And I think that's why people love to hear about it, because we kind of love to hear that people have spent another 20 here or another 30 there or another 40 there. People are trying to be more secretive about it. I find people looking for a specific home can go and look in 6 or 7 different suburbs. So some of the buyer agents I'm dealing with, they'll look in the east, they'll look in Hunters Hill, Longueville, they'll look in Mossman. So it's the house they're looking for rather than the actual suburb.
That actually leads me really nicely into what I want to talk about next, which is privacy. Tracey, how do people transact in the property market to keep it private?
So the confidentiality and discretion is one of the big tickets for anyone that's notable. They normally have a relocation agent working with them, and they do the legwork, looking at the properties. That's the actual job of the buyer agent, to narrow down the field. Also, try and find those off-market opportunities that no one has seen yet. Going on the market for a campaign is quite public. As we move into probably the next 5 years, I think we'll find much more of that. The agents dealing with a small select group of owners and buyer agents becoming much more in tune with, what's on the market quietly as well.
Do they even have open for inspections? Like you mentioned before, off-market opportunities is what people are searching for. So if somebody is selling a luxury property worth north of 40 million, north of 50 million, it's a small selection of people who can afford to buy that. How do you sell a property worth so much money?
It's definitely by appointment. Really, it's a matter of most of the top agents will vet the clients that are coming through. The buyer agents are great at actually really working out what the buyer wants. And the off-market opportunity, I think it's going to be probably a third of our business moving forward.
With the off-market sales, how can the sellers be sure they're getting the maximum price?
It's still a process. I think you've got to run the off-market listings as well as much as a strategy as you would with an on-market listing. We still do photos, floor plan. We tend to send it to the buyer agents and the clients first up. So it's normally a process where we might do that for the first, say, 4 weeks. But, normally off-market listings can be priced at the higher end of their potential range. And I think that gives everyone an opportunity to have a look, see what they think, get some price feedback, and probably 50% of those houses might get sold that way.
How long are you seeing on average for it to take to sell a property at like the $20 million mark? I imagine the pool of buyers is actually quite small.
Most properties beautifully marketed and well priced or appropriately priced would sell within a 5 or 6 week campaign. I think because the buyers are always out there, I always say it's not how long the owner's been on the market, but it's how long the buyer's been looking. And most potential buyers have been looking at a number of homes in their price point. So they're really attuned to where the market's sitting. And I feel that, when we're running auction campaigns, that it's normally a case of having an appropriate price guide, getting the right people through. 2 or 3 weeks, we find the buyers that are currently in the market, and normally an auction or an expression of interest or a private treaty sale does ensue. If things are priced appropriately for the market, they normally sell in a really timely way. And that's very exciting for Sydney because, when I first started working in real estate, you'd have these waterfront homes sitting on the market for 3 years. The whole process seems to me have been fast tracked, and then it just has more clarity for buyers as well.
Stephen, on the other end of that spectrum, I imagine you get stories leaked to you all the time. Do you think this is to get more buyers interested? Or do you think it's to increase a person's profile?
There's no doubt the publication of these stories is a win-win for all concerned. For the celebrities, I suppose, in the case of Daniel Contos and Georgia Moore, for example, they've got an online brand. These stories about their properties and about them can only help them with their sales. And then, of course, the agents themselves, the agents being linked to celebrities helps boost their profile, the agent's profile. Even some of the agents these days are becoming celebrities themselves. Gavin Rubenstein and Deleen Lewis and Simon Cohen, the buyer's agent. That's one big change that I've noticed, just how famous the actual real estate agents are becoming.
Tracey, maybe this is a question for you. What would be the implications of something leaking to the public where the vendor didn't want it to? Could you ever lose a sale?
Normally, if it's someone notable, I would encourage them to let the media know prior to launching that they're selling. I think that's a way of controlling, what's being said. And here we're just giving you the heads up. About people buying properties and it being found out. I mean, these days, often people will have a caveat put on a property that they've purchased, and that sort of alerts the media straight away. So we have agents have no control over that happening. And, we always make people aware that this can happen. Everyone has their understanding of that. It's a celebrity thing. Look, we have a lot of NRL players around the area that we sell to. That normally comes out when the properties settle. Once again, they're well aware of it. I've not really had anyone have a complete breakdown over something in the paper. Really it doesn't normally come from the agent because the agent's onus is to create that confidentiality as far as the owner wants it to happen.
They are those 1%ers and things like that. And there are probably not as many properties available in that price point as what you would find in other price points. So do people in that end of the market just end up buying each other's homes? For example, in Hollywood, Adele bought Sylvester Stallone's house for $58 million. John Mayer bought Adam Levine's house, and so on, so on, so on, so on. Tracey, do you see that happening in the Sydney market?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we are dealing with a small percentage of the Sydney real estate buyers, and just about everybody, particularly in the east, that would buy and sell would have some connection. Sydney has a small calendar of society events which are on each year that most of the people that we all deal with go to. So I think it's very likely that they do, people do buy each other's homes quite regularly, particularly within certain suburbs.
There was one case there in the Southern Highlands this year where Luke Mangan and his wife Belinda paid $4.2 million for a home that was previously owned by Michelle Bridges.
Oh, yeah.
This was a really interesting one, actually, because the Mangans actually looked at this property back in 2017 when Michelle Bridges bought it for $2.7 million. With Michelle Bridges moving back to Sydney, I think she bought in Rose Bay for around $5 million. It turns out that Luke Mangan has nabbed that same property.
Before I ask you guys my last question, which is about property hotspots and predictions, we did ask a couple of people about where they think the rich and the famous play and live.
Maybe in Sydney. I know there's some expensive houses around the Mossman and Rose Bay area and up on the Central Coast.
Have to have the Sydney Harbour, Potts Point around there, Portsea in Melbourne, Toorak, South Yarra.
Byron, Sydney, but I think there's some people sneaking into the suburbs of Melbourne unnoticed.
All of those people have been pretty bang on to what we spoke about today, which is interesting. But I would love both of your take. Tracey, you can go first on your predictions for property hotspots next year. Is Byron done? Have we moved on from that?
I don't think Byron's ever done, because I think, for a lot of reasons, people like to head to areas like that where they can really relax and enjoy a wonderful lifestyle. So I think there's always people going to be having that other property or wanting to bail out of societies that are probably more, city-based. But I think within Sydney, look, there's been a lot of buyers that are probably heading out of Sydney to sort of more rural areas around town, the Central Coast hinterland, places like Matcham. And I've had a lot of clients that move up that way, also the northern beaches. But the North Shore of Sydney, I think, is providing those folk which perhaps want a little bit of a quieter destination with, the parks and tree-lined streets and gardens and having bigger blocks of land. And I think Pymble and Killara and those areas with great private schools all around. Longueville, I've seen grow enormously over the last sort of 2 years, but everyone loves to play and live on Sydney Harbour. So I think the waterfronts are unique to Sydney, and they're not making any more of them. And I find that they are always under demand.
And Stephen, what about you?
What you said there about Byron Bay, I actually agree. Byron Bay actually had a bit of a price dip over 2023. And I reckon that people will start seeing value in Byron Bay again, probably over 2024. People are always looking for the next Byron. Maybe Port Macquarie. I reckon that's a bit of a go-ahead place for the near future. The Highlands will always be a popular spot, Central Coast. And the South Coast, definitely. And in Sydney, I just think you can't go past the east if you can afford it. People are always going to love somewhere like Potts Point because it's close to the harbour, it's close to restaurants. It's a great place for people to downsize.
I find a lot of my downsizers are heading to places like Balmain that have a great infrastructure like that as well. But they're also heading to places like Barangaroo and Pyrmont, where, that inner city, the city lifestyle's becoming really popular. There's some beautiful penthouse opportunities. And I think for people that may be coming and going to Sydney, that's going to be a strong point, I think, moving forward.
Well, thank you guys so much. It seems that the world of celebrity buying and selling is a pretty complex one. It's full of privacy, handshake deals, huge sums of money, a bit of a race to get into the property that they desire. I appreciate you both very much shedding light on it. I've definitely learned a lot, so I'm sure other people will too.
Thanks so much,
Thanks very
Alice.
much, Alice.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining me. This has been Real Talk. For your weekly fix, please follow wherever you listen to your podcasts and tune in next time for more real questions, news and insights on the topics that matter most from realestate.com.au, Australia's #1 address in property. All information provided is general advice and opinion based on current market conditions. These opinions should not be treated as investment advice. Always obtain advice based on your individual circumstances.
Real Talk acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, air and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present.